thing that came from our conversation with Jason Lauritsen, and I encourage you guys to check out the Contributors Corner this month. It was a really great episode. But another thing that was talked about was really clear expectations drawn out by employers and managers so that when people are working remotely, that it's absolutely crystal clear what the expectation is. And I'd love any of your thoughts on what's the best way to do that, in terms of communication, because when you're not sitting over someone's shoulder or in the same room, you really don't know what they're doing and when they're doing it. Any thoughts?
I think there's a part that does get missed, and that is, well, there's a social part, right? Because the last place that I worked that was in person, we were an open floor concept, open. So was there no walls, right? And so you could overhear conversations by the copier, across from the pod, whatever. And yeah, sometimes those conversations were of the social nature. So you knew if somebody was having a birthday or somebody just had a baby or whatever. But you also heard different things that were work related that was like, oh, I didn't know that. That served as some kind of inspiration or collaborative, that I think to still be collaborative, you have to be more intentional around getting together and what you're trying to do versus it used to kind of happen sometimes organically, if that makes sense. But then there's so much of that, of the social, I was not working. So it's like, I tried to think about like how much, when I was going into an office, how much was I actually working versus walking around, just talking to people. I mean, I walked around and talked to a lot of people, to be clear.
I think you and I are very similar
yeah,
in that respect.
Just Alysse and Mark walking around the building, just doing another lap.
Pretending to go get more coffee.
Oh, yeah, I need some more coffee on the second floor. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, that intentionality, I think, is another big part of this, is that when we're all remote now, in terms of building culture, in terms of building institutional knowledge, companies are having to get creative, because when they call people back and say, hey, everybody has to be in the office at least every Monday or Friday. And when people don't have a clear understanding of the benefit of that directive, I think that's when we're running into trouble. And I think all the experts that we've talked to so far say that if you have a rule, it better have a reason behind it. There has to be a why that everyone can understand and get on board with. Because a directive with no benefit is just like, oh gosh, the company's just controlling my life. And that's a big part of this struggle. I'd like to know, where do you think this whole thing is going to settle out in terms of hybrid work versus in person? Yeah, Tamar.
I mean, that Alysse joked around about the environment. I really hope that business leaders adopt this, as much as they can. I know that when you have a business where you've got a manufacturing facility, certain employees cannot work remotely. But I think, one of the biggest things, I traveled before the pandemic. So I had gone, about a year and a half with working fully remotely, and I really enjoyed it, which also created some of my workaholism. But, when the pandemic started, I remember going outside and seeing like a blue sky, and I had never seen the sky so blue before. Right. And obviously the pandemic proved that a lot of people can be incredibly productive. So having that flexibility, I think, within an organization, but there has to be that trust there and that maturity, like I mentioned before, because I think all of us, Mark, Alysse, you're both night owls. Libby and I, Elan's kind of midday, right? Like a regular morning. There has to be that element of trust that, if Libby and I are online at 4:00 in the morning, and then we may leave at 3 because we have things to do with family, that it's not looked upon, or a perception that, that person does not work as much as someone like Alysse that's emailing at 1:00 in the morning. Right. Mm-hmm. So there has to be that maturity, I think, from organizations and leadership, that I trust that the people that I've hired are doing what they need to do. And I think here at WORKP2P, that's one of the things, we were told early on, is Dan said, I trust you guys. Right. But it's also up to us as employees to make sure that we honor that and we do what we're supposed to and not take advantage of that either. Mm-hmm. So I really hope that organizations will, hold on to this because it allows that flexibility. It allows people to get what they need to get done in their life. And I think not only increasing productivity, but it can lower stress because, being stuck in traffic for an hour to go to an office, I'm sure is not good for your mental health.
Yeah. Trust is a big one. And I recall that meeting when Dan said, hey, here's a crazy idea. I trust you. I trust all of you. And because I think it was in the same day when I asked for a job description, and Dan kind of laughed and said, you ain't going to get one. And he often says, do you work for a traditional company, Mark? And I said, no. Do you work for a traditional boss? No. Stop acting like you do then. And so, yeah, the only job description he gave me was be Mark and be awesome. And I think that speaks to the level of trust that he has in us to understand what needs to get done. And then he trusts us to get it done. And, it will be apparent if we're not doing what we're supposed to. But I think part of the whole struggle with companies and employers is that they just don't trust that people will do what they're supposed to do if they can't see them. But like you were saying, Tamar, I mean, I do some of my best work from 8 to 11 p.m. I might play the drums for a half hour in the middle of the day, but then I'm working for several hours, sometimes at night, because that's when my brain works better. And that flexibility just wouldn't be there if I had a traditional job and had to show up in person. And it would be really hard to, haul the drums all the way into Seattle and set them up and for my drum break. Yeah, that was a joke. I should do a little rim shot over there, but I'm bump. But
well, I was going to say, based on what you said, that employers don't trust people to do what they're going to do. That feels a lot like projection. And I think it's kind of a critical piece of why work is broken, right? Is I don't think employees trust employers to do what they say they're going to do. And so when you don't have this covenant between your work and your life where, oh, I care about this, I'm going to work hard, we care about you, we're going to take care of you. That's not a covenant that most businesses have with their employees. So I think the trust goes both ways. So I'd be curious to know where you think that lands and how do both employees and employers meet in the middle? Because, as Gen Z enters the workforce, I think they do have some expectations that may or may not be placed in the right sequence.
Yeah, I totally get that, Elan. I think trust is a two-way street. And I think there is a lot of mistrust when it comes to employees just not trusting their employers. And what I think is interesting, though, is that, and we're coming up on 100 episodes in August for the Beats Working podcast. Every expert we've interviewed when it comes to leadership has said that you have to be trusted by your employees. There has to be a level of trust, because if they don't trust you, they're not going to work hard for you. And I think what I've experienced is that when those leaders truly care, like the way that Dan has structured this company absolutely speaks to me, that says he cares about us and our lives. My experience has been when employers show they care, I will work so much harder for that employer than I would for an employer that clearly doesn't give a crap about me or my life or my family. And I've worked for both kinds. And what I think, I hope that business leaders get to that point of truly loving their employees and caring about them, because when they get to that point, that employee is going to work so much harder and care so much more about the company's interests, not just seeing how much can I get from the employer. What else?
Well, I think one thing that also goes along with the trust factor is having a mutual respect for the other person's time. Because I do feel like when I was in other roles at other companies, when you feel like your company is wasting your time, either by having you, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, making you go into the office when you can do the work at home, or making you do, I don't know, some kind of corporate rigmarole. But I feel like when what I really appreciate about our environment is that there is a very explicit respect for people's time. And so knowing that there is that mutual respect and understanding is a motivating element to working from home. I want to do a really good job in the time I'm here because I know that I work in a place where I'm respected and valued, and I feel the same way about my colleagues. I think having that real emphasis on meeting cadences and really trying to focus your efforts, what through top six and through not emailing somebody 15 times a day, but trying to focus your communications into smaller segments, or holding things until you meet at a certain time, and really being intentional about the way you're using the time in your company. Things like that are really important and really have a huge benefit to that worker employer relationship. And I think really make a working from home environment much more productive, when you have those kinds of efforts that are being made company wide, and you feel like the time you are giving is reciprocated back.